For too long, Africa's history has been told through the lens of outsiders, reduced to a footnote in the grand story of human civilization. But what if we flip the script? Imagine a land where universities thrived centuries before Oxford or Harvard, where kings commanded wealth so vast it destabilized foreign economies, and where architectural marvels rivaled the pyramids of Egypt. This was Africa, long before colonization, slavery, or the stereotypes that cloud its past. The truth is, Africa is not just a continent of struggle, it is the cradle of humanity, the birthplace of empires, and a wellspring of knowledge that shaped the world. Yet much of this history remains buried, deliberately erased, or simply ignored. Why? Because history is written by those who hold power, and for centuries, power belonged to those who exploited Africa rather than celebrated it. Today, we embark on a journey to uncover the real Africa, the one that built, innovated, and influenced civilizations far beyond its borders. This is not a story of victimhood, but of resilience, brilliance, and a legacy that refuses to be forgotten. So stay with us, subscribe if you haven't, and prepare to be amazed. This is Africa, the untold story of a continent's glory and plunder. Africa is where humanity took its first steps. The oldest fossils of Homo sapiens, dating back roughly 300,000 years, were discovered in Jebel Irhoud, Morocco. These remains confirm what scientists have long believed. Africa is the birthplace of modern humans. But that's only the beginning of the story. Thousands of years later, the Nile Valley blossomed into one of the world's greatest civilizations, ancient Egypt. Long before the rise of Rome or Athens, Egyptians were building pyramids with mathematical precision, performing surgical procedures with copper tools, and mapping the stars with astonishing accuracy. Their written language, hieroglyphics, tells stories of gods, pharaohs, and a society obsessed with order, balance, and cosmic harmony. Yet Egypt wasn't alone. To the south, the kingdom of Kush, also known as Nubia, was a formidable African power that rivaled Egypt itself. The Nubians constructed more pyramids than the Egyptians, mastered iron technology, and ruled Egypt as its 25th dynasty, the so-called Black Pharaohs. Meanwhile, in what is now Ethiopia, the Aksumite Empire was trading with Rome and India, issuing its own currency and building stone obelisks that soared higher than most of Europe's medieval cathedrals. Africa's early civilizations were deeply connected to the wider world. They weren't isolated or backward, they were advanced, dynamic, and global. The notion of a dark continent was a colonial invention, created to justify conquest, slavery, and cultural erasure. But history tells a different tale. Africa was not in the shadows, it was blazing a trail. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, and Africa was still dazzling the world, this time through its empires of gold and knowledge. Chief among them was the Mali Empire, which reached its zenith in the 14th century under Mansa Musa, a king so wealthy that his pilgrimage to Mecca literally changed the global economy. As he passed through Cairo in 1324, he gave away so much gold that it devalued the currency for over a decade. But Mali was not just about opulence. Its crown jewel was the city of Timbuktu, home to the Sankore University and a treasure trove of ancient manuscripts. These texts, written in Arabic and African scripts, covered topics like medicine, astronomy, law, mathematics, philosophy, and ethics. Scholars came from across the Islamic world to study in Timbuktu. At its height, the city held more written records than most European libraries. To the east, the Swahili coast buzzed with global trade. Cities like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Zanzibar thrived on commerce with China, Persia, and India. African merchants traded gold, ivory, textiles, and spices in bustling port cities, where stone houses, coral mosques, and Persian gardens painted a picture of cosmopolitan elegance. Further south, the kingdom of Great Zimbabwe built massive stone cities without mortar, monumental walls and towers that still stand today. When European explorers encountered these ruins, they couldn't believe Africans had built them, so they fabricated myths about lost white civilizations. These lies persisted for generations. But the truth is now clear. Africa was home to empires built not only on gold, but on intellect, diplomacy, art, and global interconnectedness. And it was these riches, both material and cultural, that made Africa a target. The 15th century marked the beginning of a devastating chapter, the European invasion of African wealth and autonomy. It started with coastal trade, gold and spices, but soon turned into something far darker, the transatlantic slave trade. Over 12 million Africans were kidnapped, chained, and shipped across the Atlantic. Families were torn apart, cultures were disrupted, entire societies collapsed. The slave trade wasn't just about labor, it was about dehumanization. Africans were branded as property, stripped of identity, and sold in markets like commodities. The wealth generated from their suffering built European cities, funded industrial revolutions, and laid the foundations for modern capitalism. Meanwhile, Africa was being drained of its youth, creativity, and strength. Then came the scramble for Africa. In 1884, European powers met in Berlin. Not a single African leader was invited, and divided the continent with pencil and ruler. Borders were drawn with no regard for ethnic, linguistic, or cultural realities. Nations were split, rival groups forced into the same colony, and artificial states created. The consequences of those arbitrary lines are still felt today in conflict zones and political instability. The Congo Free State under Belgium's King Leopold II became a human slaughterhouse. Villagers were forced to collect rubber under threat of death. If quotas weren't met, hands were chopped off. It's estimated that 10 million Congolese died under his brutal regime. And yet, this history is rarely taught in Western schools. Colonialism was not just political domination, it was psychological warfare. African traditions were called savage. Languages were outlawed. Children were taught European history as superior and their own as non-existent. But amidst this destruction, seeds of resistance began to grow. One of colonialism's most insidious crimes was the theft of Africa's cultural identity. Art, language, religion, and history were systematically targeted for elimination. The Benin bronzes, intricate sculptures from the Kingdom of Benin, were looted by British forces in 1897 and now sit in European museums. The Rosetta Stone, essential to understanding Egypt's ancient script, remains in the British Museum, far from its African origins. This cultural plunder wasn't incidental, it was deliberate. By erasing Africa's intellectual and artistic legacy, colonizers sought to validate their own superiority. African children were taught Shakespeare but forbidden to learn about Shaka Zulu or Queen Nzinga. Christianity was used as a tool of control, often demonizing traditional beliefs and replacing ancestral wisdom with foreign dogma. But the African spirit was never fully broken. Resistance took many forms, from revolts and armed struggles to the quiet preservation of heritage. Queen Nzinga of Angola waged a decades-long war against Portuguese invaders. In Ghana, the Ashanti people fought numerous battles against British colonization. The Mau Mau uprising in Kenya challenged British rule with fierce determination. Cultural resistance also flourished in hidden spaces. Oral traditions passed down stories. Griots safeguarded history. Musicians encoded rebellion into rhythm and verse. Across the diaspora, enslaved Africans preserved identity through language, dance, and spirituality, giving birth to new cultural forms like samba, blues, and reggae. Today, the fight for cultural restoration continues. Movements like When We Return Our Artifacts push for repatriation of stolen heritage. Digital archives and 3D reconstruction technologies are helping countries like Nigeria and Ethiopia rebuild their past. Scholars are re-examining ancient texts, and artists are reclaiming narratives once silenced. Africa is not only remembering, it is rewriting. Africa's contributions to the modern world extend far beyond its borders. In music, art, language, and politics, the African imprint is unmistakable. The rhythmic foundations of jazz, blues, rock, and hip-hop trace directly to African drumming and spirituals. Afrobeat, a genre pioneered by Fela Kuti, now dominates global charts and shapes pop music worldwide. Visual artists like Pablo Picasso borrowed heavily from African aesthetics, especially West and Central African masks. Modernist art as we know it might not exist without Africa's influence, though rarely acknowledged. African textiles inspire global fashion houses. Hairstyles rooted in African tradition, like braids and locks, have become powerful statements of identity and pride. In governance, pre-colonial African societies like the Igbo of Nigeria practiced democratic decision-making through councils and consensus. The Ashanti Kingdom employed complex systems of checks and balances. These political philosophies influenced scholars and activists across the diaspora. The African diaspora itself is a living testament to resilience. From Brazil to Brooklyn, Black communities preserve and evolve African traditions. Capoeira, candomblé, jazz, and gospel are not mere echoes. They are vibrant continuations of African legacy. Africa's story is not confined to suffering. It is one of innovation, leadership, and inspiration. The continent's influence is not past tense. It is ongoing and growing. A quiet renaissance is unfolding across the continent. African scholars, archaeologists, and educators are leading efforts to rediscover and reclaim the history long buried beneath colonial narratives. Universities in Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, and Ethiopia are creating new curricula that center African perspectives. Archaeological discoveries continue to rewrite what we know. In Sudan, researchers are uncovering ancient cities older than previously imagined. In the Sahara, satellite imagery reveals once thriving trade routes and settlements. In Timbuktu, despite extremist threats, thousands of manuscripts have been preserved, many now digitized to protect them for future generations. Technology is playing a crucial role. From open-source historical databases to African-led YouTube channels and podcasts, history is being democratized and decolonized. Museums are being built, not just to house artifacts, but to tell stories authentically. And the youth are leading the charge. From music and fashion to literature and activism, a new generation is embracing its roots and refusing to be defined by colonial scars. They're not just remembering the past, they're shaping the future. Africa's story is not one of tragedy. It is one of triumph. A land of firsts, a birthplace of civilization, a fountain of knowledge and creativity. Though exploitation sought to dim its light, Africa continues to shine through its people, its legacy, and its contributions to the world. To honor this history is to challenge stereotypes, decolonize education, and demand justice. Africa is not just rising, it has always risen. And now the world is beginning to see. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe for more untold histories. The past is not dead, it's waiting to be rediscovered.